In today's episode of Locked On Oilers, the Oilers don't need another defenseman. We will talk about that. Plus, speaking of defensemen, how was Tyson Barrie's season? We will talk about that. And are the Edmonton Oilers to blame for the Calgary Flames' implosion? We will talk about that and much more on today's episode of Locked On Oilers.
You're Locked On Oilers, your daily podcast on the Edmonton Oilers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome back to Locked On Oilers podcast. I am your host and former Oilers game day producer, Brett Holden. As mentioned on today's episode, we're going to be talking about the Oilers defense. They don't need another defenseman. We will get into the organizational depth of the Edmonton Oilers in just a bit. Plus, Tyson Barrie, how much did he help that organizational depth? And just how well did he do this season? And finally, on the last period of today's episode is going to be a little bit of a rant, but the rant is about whether or not the Edmonton Oilers are to blame for the Calgary Flames implosion, seemingly. We will get to that and so much more on today's episode of Locked On Oilers. Thank you so much for making Locked On Oilers your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you find your podcast. Plus, we are up on YouTube as well. If you aren't watching on YouTube or haven't subscribed to the YouTube, make sure you do that because today is seemingly a jersey day because I have my Blue Jays jersey on. I smacked the microphone again. I've got a beautiful lad. A lot of people don't like this blue jersey. I didn't mind it. The blue ones are all right. The white ones, however, of that little, the white with copper piping was awful. Got a little bit of a Linus Omark touch behind us, and of course, Ilya Bryzgalov to our back. But let's start with the Edmonton Oilers defense today, as a lot of conversation has been around whether or not the Edmonton Oilers need to bring in another defenseman. You have left a lot of comments on my YouTube saying the Edmonton Oilers don't need Patrick Kane, they need a defenseman. No, they don't. Sorry to break it to you, but they don't. They have defensemen in their organization ready to play right now. If you bring in another defenseman, that's just going to stunt the development of, four defensemen and potentially six here. Are you really willing to do that, especially when a lot of the people who comment saying, the Edmonton Oilers need defense, they don't need Patrick Kane because they're selling the farm, they won't have a future. The Edmonton Oilers have a future on their back end. Are you not paying attention to that? The Edmonton Oilers defense, as of today, without any moves right now, is first pairing of Darnell Nurse and Cody Ceci is down the stretch. That showed to be a very solid pairing, especially with the way that Cody Ceci became the Edmonton Oilers' premier shutdown defenseman near the end of the season. Then the second pairing, Brett Kulak and Evan Bouchard. That is a fantastic pairing, especially for a guy like Evan Bouchard, coming off of a pairing with an NHL legend in Duncan Keith. And a lot of praise for Brett Kulak ever since the Oilers traded for him as one of the, and also one of the best not only shutdown defensemen for the Oilers, but all-around defensemen as well. The kid can move the puck, he can shoot it, he's a fantastic skater. And pairing him with Evan Bouchard, who is a little bit mistake-prone, is a very solid combination there. Very solid top four for the Edmonton Oilers already. Then in their bottom pairing, this is their bottom pairing, Philip Broberg and Tyson Barrie. That's their bottom pairing. People within the Oilers organization think that Philip Broberg is a future number one defenseman. Jay Woodcross said that he is something special. He's on the Oilers' third pairing. Now, where else would he really fit in? Maybe with a Brett Kulak. I mean, personally, for me, a Kulak-Broberg pairing would also be cool. Even a Broberg-Bouchard, but I feel like that would be a little too mistake-prone as well. I don't think that would, in the long term, do too well, but I think that would be a very cool thing to see as well. Now, this is where the people go, oh, yeah, the Oilers need depth. The Oilers need a defenseman. Okay, how about this? As mentioned in yesterday's episode, Marcus Niemelainen and Vincent Desharnais are things. In fact, they are very big things. In fact, they are very big human beings, and they happen to play in the NHL. Well, Vincent Desharnais not yet, but he stands at 6'7", 230 pounds. He has been praised for his development of his skating and his ability to cover 5-on-5 and also plays on the penalty kill. That sounds like an NHLer to me. And the Edmonton Oilers have two guys on their coaching staff that have a lot of experience with Vincent Desharnais in the head coach in Jay Woodcroft and maybe the defensive coach, the coach of the defensemen in Dave Manson. Oh, weird how the Edmonton Oilers defense became very, very solid down the stretch. Well, the playoffs are a little muddied. We can talk about that if you want. But the Edmonton Oilers defense became very difficult to play against at sometimes, and you saw the progression of guys like an Evan Bouchard, hopefully, potentially with a guy like Philip Broberg, but you take a look at the progression of a guy like Tyson Barrie, which we will get to in our second period of today's episode, but Tyson Barrie became one of the Edmonton Oilers' best defensemen, not only offensively, but defensively as well after Jay Woodcroft and Dave Manson came in for the Edmonton Oilers. And that's only one of the organizational depth pieces, or two, I guess, that the Edmonton Oilers have. There are rumblings that Slater Cuckoo could be making a comeback for the Edmonton Oilers, a veteran guy who's played in the NHL, former, I believe, 4th overall pick, maybe 5th, I can't remember off the top of my head, but a top 5, top 10 pick in the NHL draft. He may have been 10th overall, I forget. But a guy who has been comfortable and familiar with the organization, has been in the organization for a couple years now. Yes, I know you may have forgotten about Cuckoo, but he did shatter or break his collarbone. I think it was his clavicle, in that Battle of Alberta a couple of years ago. Kind of wasn't the same since, but he's been making some strides. I love Slater Cuckoo. I think he's very solid in his own end, in the offensive end, in the neutral zone. He will go into corners, fight for the puck, and move the puck just as well as anybody else on the team. I think Slater Cuckoo is a very solid 7th D-man for the Edmonton Oilers. Then, on the other side, a guy who, if he doesn't get traded if the Oilers do trade and this guy is Dmitry Samorukov, they better be getting something very good in return, because Dmitry Samorukov has the potential to be a very solid top 4, probably, defenseman, offensive defenseman in this league. He has a physical side. He's a little mean at times. He can shoot. He can skate. He is a solid defenseman, and I think he's ready for the NHL now. He got a little bit of a taste against the St. Louis Blues this year. We know how that went. He ended up getting benched, but that was under Dave Tippett, not Jay Woodcroft, who has had a lot of experience with Dmitry Samorukov over the past couple seasons as well. Then a couple of outliers for the Edmonton Oilers as well in their organization, who I think are going to be NHLers at some point, and I think very stable NHLers as well. And that is Phil Kemp and Michael Kesselring. If you were able to catch any of the Billy Moore's Cup, you saw Michael Kesselring's massive hit in that game, and that's what he brings. Those are two guys who are both over 6'5". But the Edmonton Oilers not only have Phil Kemp and Michael Kesselring over 6'5", they have Marcus Niemelainen over 6'5". Vincent Desharnais, who's standing at 6'7". That is massive. That is big. Imagine coming into Rogers Place and realizing that, oh man, I have to play Connor McDavid, Leon Draisaitl, Evander Kane, and those big guys in the back. Where are you going to add somebody? The only guys that I see that are available for the Edmonton Oilers that would actually make them any sort of better, rather than just signing somebody to sign somebody. Best guy available right now, PK Subban, but his cap hit was a $9 million last year. I don't think he's going to make that in his next contract, but that's a big price tag either way. Danny DeKeyser as well available, $5 million cap hit last year. but he's American. Seems like Americans aren't really willing to play up north. Sorry, Calgary. Calvin DeHaan at a $5.55 million cap hit. He's a Canadian, so it may be a little easier. Will Butcher as well at a $3.733 from New Jersey. Unfortunately, he's also American. But Tom, these next two names, both Western Canadian boys, so potentially. Thomas Hickey, $2.5 million cap hit last year. He's from Calgary, so maybe he'll come to the right side. And Ryan Murray, the former second overall pick from the 2012 NHL draft. Was that 2012? Yes, it was 2012, because I was here. The Edmonton Oilers selected Neil Yakupov. Yes, exactly. He's from Saskatchewan, so, I mean, if the Edmonton Oilers are looking at a defenseman to bring in, maybe those are some names, especially on the lower end, not PK Subban. Danny DeKeyser is American, who is the other name that I mentioned. Will Butcher, I threw it off to the side, I forgot. He's also American, so I think you could toss those names away. Maybe a Thomas Hickey or somebody like that, Calvin DeHaan, may be a better ad. Well, let's talk about the Edmonton Oilers defense a little bit more, but more specifically with Tyson Barrie. How was his season? Was he the Edmonton Oilers' best defenseman last year? We will get into that in just a second, but first, I want to tell you about our partners over at Built. From the people who invented healthy and tasty comes the latest gift to your taste buds. You've probably tried the amazing coconut brownie chunk Built bar, but guess what? Your friends at Built have given the coconut brownie chunk the Puffs treatment. That is right, the coconut brownie chunk Built bar flavor you love in a deliciously chewy marshmallow covered in 100% real chocolate. It's like a fluffy cloud of coconut brownie goodness. Oh my goodness. Oh, okay, stop drooling, everybody. Stop drooling and listen. They are good for you, low calorie, low sugar, high protein, and all delicious. Plus, all Built bars are made with collagen protein, which your body actually absorbs more efficiently and provides tons of health benefits to you as well. Eat something that tastes good and is actually good for you as well. Head to built.com. I almost said lockedon.com, but that is not it. Head to built.com and use the promo code LOCKED15. There's the locked part of it. LOCKED15 to get 15% off your next order at built.com. That is built.com using the promo code LOCKED15 to get 15% off your next order. Alrighty, let's move into the Edmonton Oilers. Probably one of their best offensive defense. I shouldn't say probably. He is the Edmonton Oilers, or one of the Edmonton Oilers' best offensive defensemen, but is he the best Edmonton Oilers? Well, Tyson Barrie had a very solid season, and I know a lot of people do not like Tyson Barrie as well. That is mostly just because Edmonton Oilers fans, I don't know. They just don't like anybody who does one thing wrong. But Tyson Barrie last season, 73 games played, 7 goals, 34 assists, good for 41 points. A very solid season again for him. A little bit of a downturn from the season before. Obviously, last season, he was the highest scoring defenseman in the NHL. And then this year, not so much, but he was not only very solid offensively, but as soon as Dave Manson and Jay Woodcroft stepped in on February 10th, he kind of became a new player, to be honest with you. A very solid defenseman in his own end, especially when he got paired up with Brett Kulak. And it was kind of, especially in the playoffs, their best pairing throughout, I guess, the 3 rounds the Edmonton Oilers were in. In the playoffs, 16 games played, 1 goal, 4 assists, 5 points for Barrie. Now, I know that, again, doesn't sound too impressive, but The change in the game from Tyson Barrie from the focus of the offensive side to the defensive side was very apparent. And it was something that the Edmonton Oilers in the playoffs desperately needed with Darnell Nurse's hip flexor injury. To be honest with you, Evan Bouchard was not very good, to put it in the slightest of terms. And Duncan Keith was at the end of his career, and you could see it. Honestly, at points, Tyson Barrie and Brett Kulak were the best defensemen for the Oilers, and the same with Cody Ceci. It was a tough split for the Edmonton Oilers because half of their defensemen were really bad, and half of their defensemen were just making sure that the ship didn't sink. Tyson Barrie was one of those guys who was really making sure the ship didn't sink. Last year, we're getting into my favorite stats, the goals for and goals against per 60 minutes. For Tyson Barrie in all situations was quite impressive. A 4.25 goals for per 60 minutes in all situations. That was good for 5th on the Edmonton Oilers. You know the 4 players who were above him? Yeah, they were 97. They were number 29. They were number 91. And they wear number 93. Do you know those guys? Connor McDavid, Leon Draisaitl, Evander Kane, and Ryan Nugent-Hopkins. Yeah, following them was Tyson Barrie. Very solid names to be following for Tyson Barrie there. Then defensively, goals against per 60 minutes. In all situations, a 2.51, which was good for 7th on the team, which was higher than Brett Kulak, Ryan Nugent-Hopkins, and Evan Bouchard as well. So again, you see that growth and somehow growth, because Tyson Barrie, off the top of my head, I think is 30, if not almost 30. You still see the growth in his game, becoming a better defender in his own end. Then at 5-on-5, the numbers kind of dip a little bit, but you have to realize that, especially offensively, Tyson Barrie is more of a offensive defenseman and will play on the power play. At 5-on-5, he had a 2.92 goals for per 60 minutes, which was good for 9th, middle of the pack. And then at 5-on-5, again, goals against per 60 minutes was at a 2.5, once again 9th on the team. So again, middle of the pack, where you'd basically expect your second pairing, third pairing, hopefully, defenseman to be sitting. But the impressive thing is, as well, is that he's an offensive defenseman, or seen as an offensive defenseman, and him being up there 9th for goals against per 60 for a team that wasn't exactly the best defensively in all points is very solid, especially with a 2.5 goals against per 60 minutes. Then on the power play, Tyson Barrie, what numbers did this guy have? 11.66 goals for per 60 minutes for Tyson Barrie. That was 3rd on the team, behind only Jesse Puljujärvi. Yes, Puljujärvi. And Ryan Nugent-Hopkins. In fact, Tyson Barrie had a higher goals for per 60 minutes than Connor McDavid, Leon Draisaitl, and Zach Hyman. That's interesting. Want to know something else that was interesting? Tyson Barrie finished 22nd in the league in goals for per 60 minutes on the power play. You know who he finished right above at 23? Some dude named Austin Matthews. Ever heard of him? Yeah, Austin Matthews had an 11.65 goals for per 60 minutes, so I'd say Tyson Barrie is better than Austin Matthews. I'm just kidding. But yes, Tyson Barrie, I think you especially when you take a look at the numbers, I know a lot of people aren't a massive fan of him, but now that the Edmonton Oilers may be trading him, you see a lot of people coming out of the woodwork going, oh, keep Tyson Barrie, keep Tyson Barrie. But I think Tyson Barrie, a very solid season, quietly very solid season. In fact, so solid, he's getting our first A on the back end. Tyson Barrie, A- for your season. Very solid season again. That is why you're getting paid $4.5 million. I dig it. I wish, but again, I'm a big Tyson Barrie guy. I think he's been very solid in his growth since Dave Manson stepped up and took over that defensive role for the Edmonton Oilers. He does say it'll be interesting to see how he does on that back end. Alrighty. I have a little bit of a rant. I won't lie to you, I have a little bit of a rant. But it's okay, because if you're an Edmonton Oilers fan, it may be a rant you want to hear. If you're a Calgary Flame fan, you may want to tune out now, because is this implosion from the inside of the Calgary Flames the Edmonton Oilers' fault? We will get to that in just a second, but first, which NFL stars do you think are moving the betting line the most? Well, starting on July 18th, which was on Monday, so make sure you catch up. On July 18th, Locked On gives you the 50 most valuable players in the NFL from the odds makers at BetOnline. Available July 18th on Locked On NFL, wherever you get your podcasts, and on YouTube. That's going to be very useful for me, because a lot of people in my fantasy league think they are fleecing me in my trades with them, but no! I know what I'm doing. I've won a couple. Sorry, that was a conversation from somewhere else that just bugged me. I'm kidding. But all right. Rant time. Little bit of a Thursday rant. And this rant is whether or not the Calgary Flames' utter implosion from the inside is because of the Edmonton Oilers. Now, I'll 100% be honest with you. I'm kind of disappointed that Johnny Gaudreau went to Columbus and Matthew Tkachuk is probably leaving. It's when, not if, Matthew Tkachuk gets traded from the Calgary Flames. Sitting here, taking over this show from Hernan, one of the greatest things for me was being able to cover the first Battle of Alberta in the playoffs since the 1990s. Actually, for over 30 years. Over 30 years. I wasn't even born the last time the Edmonton Oilers and the Calgary Flames met in the playoffs. And it finally looked like we were going to have the Battle of Alberta like it was in the 80s, a great, overpowering, or very strong, star-powered Edmonton Oilers and the muck and grind of the Calgary Flames once again. Unfortunately, it looks like we're not going to get that. Johnny Gaudreau has jumped ship and left Calgary for the Columbus Blue Jackets. Who else is left? Eric Goodbranson also went to Columbus. Calle Jarnkrok went to Toronto. Now, I know that's not a massive loss, but still is a loss. David Rittich as well, a very solid backup goaltender for them there, left. He left the year before as well. He went to Nashville. I was wrong there. Dan Vladar is an RFA there, so Jakob Markstrom is kind of the only goaltender. The good thing for Calgary is that they have $18 million in cap space, I guess, and they'll probably get more with Matthew Tkachuk moving. But it's not Johnny Gaudreau and Matthew Tkachuk. Whoever you bring in is not going to produce over 200 points for you in the NHL. That is what you got from Johnny Gaudreau and Matthew Tkachuk. Now, why do I think it's the Edmonton Oilers' fault? Let's be real. The Calgary Flames were coming off winning the Pacific Division. They were going into a very, very favorable matchup against the Edmonton Oilers. A lot of Edmonton Oilers fans had that 9-6 game stuck in their head going, oh, this isn't going to be good. This isn't be good. Look what happened. First game was 9-6? Great. That's good. And then the Edmonton Oilers continued to win game 2. Game 4, game 5, and sent Calgary packing all of a sudden. Everybody remembers now Johnny Gaudreau's final shift as the Calgary Flame, and now Matthew Tkachuk's final shift as the goal that eliminated the Calgary Flames, scored by none other than Connor McDavid. Now I know that's like, oh, whatever. They played the Edmonton Oilers, and that was the last shift. The Calgary Flames were supposed to win that series. They were supposed to go on. And even I said that the Calgary Flames would win that series. I know there are people who weren't very happy with me when I said that, but I thought realistic. The Calgary Flames were a very solid team from the first line to the fourth line to the first pairing to the third pairing, and a very solid goaltender in between the pipes as well. Then the Edmonton Oilers picked them apart. Then all of a sudden, Johnny Gaudreau doesn't see a future in Calgary. Matthew Tkachuk won't sign long-term with the Calgary Flames. All of this seemed a little sudden, did it not? Now, I've been talking to some of my Calgary Flame fan friends, and they were saying, yeah, but we've always kind of knew that Johnny would maybe leave, or we would have to have this conversation at some point. But after the season that the Calgary Flames had, after reigniting the Battle of Alberta, becoming the best rivalry once again in the NHL, you want to leave? You're going to have the entire spotlight from the league on you at all times, and you want to leave? You're going up against two of the best players, not every night, but you're always thinking, what did the Edmonton Oilers do? And you want to leave? Did the Edmonton Oilers become so good? Not only so good, and this really does sound like I'm pumping the Edmonton Oilers tires, but the Edmonton Oilers beat the Flames 4-1 in that series, in a series that a lot of people had the Flames beating them in. And now the Flames lose Johnny Gaudreau, one of their best players in the last potentially ever. Jarome Iginla. Never mind, Jarome Iginla. Matthew Tkachuk as well, who's right along with those three, or two, I should say, make it a three. What is going on? And then, on top of it, the only moves that the Calgary Flames have made to counter these losses are the signings of Ben Jones, Edmonton Oilers legend Kevin Gravel, goaltender Oscar Dansk, Dennis Gilbert, don't even know who that is, Kevin Rooney, who happens to be their biggest signing so far, Colton Poolman, who I didn't realize there was another Poolman other than Tucker, and Nicholas Milosh. People have joked that now the Saddle Dome will have two AHL teams in their building. I'm like, oh, haha, that's pretty funny. But who do the Calgary Flames have left? Michael Backlund? Does he move a needle on a first-line team? Or does he move the needle as a first-liner on a very good team? On a team who could win or should have won the Pacific Division, won the Pacific Division last year? I don't think so. Milan Lucic is potentially a first liner once again for the first time since he was doing it with Connor McDavid. Kind of scary. Blake Coleman signed to a pretty solid deal, had a pretty decent season, but is he going to be your top winger? Don't think so. I'd hope not. Elias Lindholm, very solid season. I love Elias Lindholm. Will he put up with mediocrity for the next couple of years? Maybe not. Tyler Toffoli, a very solid ad. I think he's a very good hockey player. Will he be the guy going forward for the Calgary Flames? Is he the guy, or should he be the guy for the Calgary Flames move? Probably not. Dylan Dubé hasn't had a fantastic season. Well, led the Calgary Flames in hits a couple times, but I think Flames fans do really love Dylan Dubé, so I'll rescind that. I don't want to pile on too much. Andrew Mangiapane had a very solid start of the season. Now he's an RFA, just like Matthew Tkachuk. Will he stay? Not. People were talking about potentially trading Mangiapane at the deadline. This is a team in shambles. I haven't even gotten to the defensemen yet. Chris Tanev, old and injured, couldn't play against the Edmonton Oilers, really. Rasmus Andersson, pretty solid defenseman. I like Rasmus Andersson. Noah Hannafin, there you go. There's your top pairing. But is that a top pairing for a Stanley Cup winning team? Is that a top pairing for a playoff team? I don't know. Especially when you take a look at the teams around you for the Calgary Flames. The Edmonton Oilers got better, got their goalie. I mean, Evander Kane staying, who was an absolute menace to the Calgary Flames. Vegas Golden Knights could potentially get better as well. LA Kings are a quietly strong team. The San Jose Sharks are getting younger. The Anaheim Ducks are getting younger. I mean, they have one of the best young players of the next generation in Trevor Zegras. I'm a big fan of Jamie Drysdale, and they have a fantastic goaltender in John Gibson. Arizona Coyotes are the Arizona Coyotes. Remember whether or not they're even in our division anymore. Seattle Kraken just got Shane Wright and have Matty Beniers already in their organization. They're going to be very solid down the stretch. Vancouver's Vancouver. But the Calgary Flames all of a sudden potentially became the worst team, or become the worst team in the Pacific Division. Is it because of the Oilers? I don't know. I think this rant has gone a little too long, but I appreciate you sitting there and listening to me there. What do you think? Is it the Oilers' fault? Obviously, the Flames are going to have to go through this at some point, but it's kind of weird timing, is it not? Either way, we shall call it there. Thank you so much for making Locked On Oilers your first listen every day. Now for your second listen, make sure you tune in to Locked On NHL. Locked On experts give you a daily 30-minute podcast on all things NHL all year long. Stay up to date on everything in the hockey world. Locked On NHL, your daily 30-minute NHL podcast. Alrighty, again, we shall call it there. Hey, Kenny, let's make a move here. We're getting dry on the content, but let's talk about a defenseman that you signed, or a trade or something. Please, anything. Sign a minor leaguer, please. Anyways, let's move on. I hope you have a wonderful day. Tomorrow's Friday, and then it goes into the weekend. It's Friday then. Okay, I won't get into it yet. It's Fridays tomorrow. We'll do the dance and sing tomorrow. Either way, I hope you have a wonderful Thursday. Stay safe. Don't do anything I wouldn't do.